Well, our brother Ray alluded to this in his call to worship, but who remembers the whole vision statement of the Church and Drive? Well, Kendra, she raised her hand and then left. Keep us in suspense. Is anybody still in the room remember it? Ben's got it? What is it? I heard you say yeah. Oh. All right. Well, listen, if you're going to talk over there, you got to whisper at least. All right. All right. All right. I'll give you a hint. It starts off, the Church and Drive is an intentional community. Huh? Yeah, that exists. Hey, that's pretty close. All right, good job, Joshua. Yeah, the Church and Drive is an intentional community that seeks to help our members discover, develop, and deploy our unique gifts to influence our world for Christ. And it's that last phrase that I want to drill down in this evening. In fact, it's that last phrase that I want to spend much of the next year working on. I feel like we are pretty good at doing the intentional community piece. We meet around tables. Man, you got to whisper. We meet around tables and we do a lot that encourages people to get to know each other. We've got our small groups that meet online and in person, and there's a lot of stuff that we are working together on. And we've been working at helping people discover, develop, and deploy our gifts. We've got a huge group of people involved in leading worship, in music for church, in leading the Bible studies, in serving on various ministry teams, being on the tech team, all kinds of ways that people are serving and deploying their gifts in now, even in the last piece that we've rotated is in the last several months with the preaching team, where we have just an amazing amount of folks who are using their gifts and developing their gifts, and we're seeing fruit be born from that. And so now I want us as a church to kind of not leave behind our intentional community and not leave behind helping people discover, develop, and deploy their gifts, but build on those things with taking it to the next step and influencing our world for Christ. If we're going to do that, we've got to do some kind of exploratory work or little research first. We've got to figure out, well, what is our world? If you're going to influence your world for Christ, then you've got to figure out what is the world. We don't necessarily mean the globe, right? There's 8 billion people on the planet, and most of us aren't going to know all of them, right? In fact, no matter how many Facebook friends you have or Instagram followers, or Matt, how many MySpace friends you've got, you are sorry, you aren't going to be able to have a gigantic influence on. You always got Tom. That's right. Tom will never leave. That's right. If you've had a MySpace, you get it. Yeah, but you're not going to be able to connect with every single person on the planet. Jesus himself, when he was physically on the planet, didn't get very far away from his hometown ever. And so we have to be as strategic as Jesus in our effort to influence our world for Christ. What Jesus did, instead of trying to communicate to every single person on the planet, Jesus picked his sphere of influence and he leaned hard into it, and he made a big impact. And that impact that he made rippled out until here we are 2,000 years later, and Christianity is the largest faith on the planet. And there are believers on every continent, and the gospel is being preached in more and more languages, almost all the languages. And so you have to determine what area of the world, which corner of the globe, and what area around you, what circumstances you're going to be able to make the biggest impact in. And then you're going to have to decide, what does influencing that sphere look like? Maybe it's your neighborhood. Maybe it's your workplace. Maybe it's your family. Maybe it's the people who live on your floor in your dorm or in your apartment building. Maybe it's the people on your hockey team or whatever. What is the area? What is the sphere that you're going to be able to have the most influence on? And then what is it to influence that group of people? What does it mean? What do they need? What are they looking for? How would you connect with them? In the book of Acts, we've noticed several times in the last several years when we studied it, that Paul used different tactics when he was talking with different groups of people. When Paul was talking with Jewish believers or Jewish folks who was hoping to convert to believers, he would lean heavy on the Old Testament. He would show how the Messiah prophesied in the Old Testament was Jesus, that Jesus fulfilled all these Old Testament prophecies, and Jesus was the one that the Jewish faith had been pointing to all along. But when he's in Athens amongst all these Greek philosophers who didn't have a whole lot of knowledge of the Hebrew scriptures, he took a different tack. He approached them differently. He still got to the biblical story of God being the creator of everything, but he didn't necessarily start there. He started from their culture, from like, hey, you've got these idols. This is Acts chapter 17, if you want to look it up and check me later. But he noticed that the town of Athens was full of idols, and that the people were trying to be religious. They were trying to be faithful to what they thought they knew and what their practices were. And he stumbled across this idol that said, to an unknown God. And Paul says, that's it. That's my entry. They're worshiping all these Aphrodites and Zeus and, Poseidon, whatever. But they've got this idol that says to an unknown God in case they missed anybody. Right? They've got all these gods that they're worshiping, and they have the Parthenon that's supposed to be for everybody, all the gods. But they say, there might be a God we don't know. We better have a statue for him. And Paul says, you're already worshiping a God you don't know. Let me tell you about him. And he's so much greater than everything else. And that was an effective evangelism strategy for him. And so once you've diagnosed what your sphere of influence is, who the people are that you are going to connect with, then you got to think, well, what is it? How am I going to do it? What's my strategy going to be for bringing about that influence? In the scripture that Jonathan read for us in Ephesians chapter 5, it says to be very careful how you live. Be very careful how you live. And if you're careful about something, that means you put thought into it, right? The opposite of careful is careless. Right? If you're careless, you're not thinking, you're just going about willy-nilly doing whatever. To be careful means you're being thoughtful, you're being methodical, you're being strategic, you're living on purpose. Be careful how you live. Not as unwise, but as wise. Making the most out of every opportunity, because the days are evil. It says we're supposed to, another translation says, redeem the time. Right? We are meant to be careful in our approach to influencing our world for Christ. What Paul's saying here is the days are evil, right? And sometimes we all get sucked into this. I myself was guilty of this just yesterday, talking about how bad and broken the world is, how it's so much worse than it used to be, and how when I was in school, these were the troubles, but now, kids have all these other pressures. And, this pattern of behavior, pattern of speech that I think most of us fall into from time to time, talking about how hard it is to be a Christian in these times, or how we have to guard against this or that, or, there's all these influences. And that's always been the case. We always think it's worse now than it used to be, that the good old days were whatever. All right. But the truth is, this world's been broken since Genesis chapter 3, right? This world's been broken since Genesis chapter 3. And different pressures prop up, but they're nothing really new. Way back in Ecclesiastes. What's the refrain that Solomon always comes back to? There's nothing new under the sun. Well, Solomon was tired of it 3,000 years ago, and 3,000 years later, some things have changed, but some things have stayed the same. And one of the things that stayed the same is humans and our nature and the nature of this world that we live in. And so 2,000 years ago, Paul writes these words and says, be very careful how you live, not as unwise, but as wise. Make the most of every opportunity. I heard a preacher say one time that Christians should never, ever, ever use the phrase, I'm killing time. That was like, struck me between the eyes. Like, how many of us say, I just got to kill time until this? I got an appointment in 3 hours. And so I've just got to spend these minutes until I get to this time. And he said, that's like the opposite of what we're commanded to do in Ephesians chapter 5. That's, if you're killing time, you're not making the most of every opportunity. You're not redeeming the time, you're squandering it. And what Paul's talking about here, he's saying there's these evil days. Yeah, there's this broken world. There's this whole lot of need all around us. And we need to make the most of every opportunity. We got to be strategic. We've got to be thoughtful so that we can redeem the time. Be careful how we're living. Think about strategically, what am I doing with the minutes that I have been given in my life so that I can influence my world for Jesus? And what I've noticed is that over the course of my life, as I have lived for a few more years, that my sphere of things change, and my focus has changed. When I was a college student, I talk about this a lot. If you were at our vision meeting a month and a half ago, we talked about wanting to live into that last part of our vision statement, influencing our world for Christ. And I said, I really, really, really love campus ministry. I love college ministry. One of the reasons I'm so passionate about college ministry is because for those 8 semesters or so, or 10 semesters, give or take, however long people take, I think that is about the most productive, the most fruitful, the most bang for the kingdom buck a person can have, because if you're thinking about it, and if you're making the most of every opportunity, every 16 weeks, you get a new mission field. Every 16 weeks, you're in a new set of classes, and you're sitting beside people 2 or 3 times a week for an hour or more that you're never going to see again after that semester ends. Every semester, people graduate. Every semester, people transfer. Every semester, people drop out. Every semester, things change. And so every semester, you've got this 16-week chunk of time where you can make, and you figure out your sphere of influence. It's really easy. They're the people sitting around you, right? And the people that you're interacting with in your dorms. And every semester, some of those people are going to go away, and you're never going to see them again this side of heaven. And so we can make this big impact. And that's what I love working. That's why one of the reasons I love working with college kids and doing campus ministry is because you've got all these opportunities to touch people with the gospel. After you graduate, you've probably noticed this, those of you who have graduated, life doesn't change that much. After you get in, you get in the apartment, and, people stay in apartments for a long time. You buy a house, and your neighbors, once in a while somebody new moves in, but a lot of times I've lived in the same house for 14 years now, and I've had some new neighbors move in, but they stay pretty much the same. You have a few conversations with them, and the folks around me stay the same. And when you get to your job, if you get a career type job and you're there for 5 or 10 or 15 or more years, your coworkers, sometimes somebody new will get hired, but you never, after college, have the same dynamic of this constant change of influence in sort of things. Just don't change that much anymore. But I've discovered a new way to influence my world through Christ, or to try what I'm doing now. I've recognized there are other people who can do about as well as I can ministry on campus. There are other people, in fact, these college kids that are here are doing awesome on campus at Saginaw Valley State University, Delta College. We're seeing real growth in standing in the gap. And I'm super, super excited about that. And the college students at Gap are more effective at bringing more college students into Gap than I am. Used to be I could sit at an info table on campus and have a lot of conversations and, get people to come to Gap. Now I sit at the info table and people just kind of zipping past me. Who's that guy? Yeah. Thanks. But this is how it goes, right? So other people are better at table sits now than I am. But one of the things that I'm doing now to try to on purpose influence my world for Christ is my kids are doing a lot of sports, doing soccer, doing flag football, doing baseball. And all of those things, all of those organizations, they need coaches. They need adults who are going to spend some time teaching kids. And I've learned as I've been in this, starting to help either head coach or assistant coach, some people are super, super good at it. And other people are taking it way too seriously. And like, there's some negative influences that are happening in coaching children. And so I want to be a positive influence. This is a place where in our soccer season that just ended, on our team, we had, I think, a couple of Muslim kids and a couple other kids from non-Christian homes and some people from Christian homes. But I get to talk with with the kids, and I get to know some of their parents. We go have lunch in a couple of weeks with one of the other dads from one of our soccer teams. And so this is my new sphere of influence. This is a new place that I can, is for myself as a pastor, and now I work for our denomination. It's hard for me to meet non-Christians. Sometimes I work, the longer I'm in the church, the harder it is to meet people who don't already know Jesus or don't have a familiarity with the gospel. But here's a place where I found where I can be an influence and help. And you know what I found out? I don't know. I didn't play soccer in high school. I don't really, it took me a long time to figure out what a goal kick was versus what the corner kick is. And I still don't have it all quite figured out. But as long as I'm coaching 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds, I know more than they do. And so, as they grow, I'll learn some more. But there's a way, if you just show up and be available, then people are happy to have you there, and you have this opportunity to influence your world through Christ. So maybe it's not coaching, but there are plenty of places where schools are looking for volunteers to come in and help kids learn how to read better or read with kids, or there places where you could go and work with the Caring Closet or the Rescue Mission, or lots of other things that you can use your gifts, your talents, things that you're already into, things that you're already good at, and you can share those with another group of people who are coming. They're not coming to hear the gospel. They're not coming to, the people on our soccer team, they didn't sign up to play soccer in order to be preached to. And I'm not preaching to them. I'm just becoming friends with them. And that's where this starts. If you think about strategy, okay, here is my sphere of influence. This is the group of people that I feel called to right now. This is what it means to influence them with the gospel. Here's where they are, and here's where I think Jesus wants them to be. How am I going to go about trying to help them connect with God's will for their lives? That's where we get into that strategy that Paul used in Acts chapter 17 and other places, where he kind of diagnoses the situation. Where can I find common ground with this person? Where can I meet them where they are? And then tell them my story. And that's what Paul does in Acts 17. He tells them his story. And if you get to know people and you listen to their story, you ask them questions about themselves, then most people, if they have any kind of social graces at all, eventually are going to ask you about your story. If you listen to somebody long enough, you ask them enough questions about themselves, most people are going to reciprocate and ask you. And then you get a chance to tell them a little bit about yourself and introduce some kernel, some nugget of the gospel in that. Maybe it's as simple as, my church had a Super Bowl party, or my church is having a Super Bowl party. Would you like to come? Or my church is having a picnic, or we're having a game night, or hey, I've got this dinner I'm hosting at my house with some people from my church, and I'd love for you to come. Whatever it is. In Matthew chapter 28, verses 16 through 20, we call it the Great Commission. An author and a teacher I really like named Dan Spader, says that we really ought to rename it the Everyday Commission, because a lot of times it gets translated go into all the world and make disciples. But really with what's happening in the Greek there, it should be translated as you are going, make disciples. Wherever it is you happen to be, as you live your life and go to the grocery store and go coach your kids' soccer team, or go to the aerobics class, or go to the whatever it is you're doing, make disciples and teach them to obey everything I've commanded you. Live your life in front of them, enter into relationships and conversations with them, and help them come to know Jesus. That's what it means to influence our world for Christ. And as we continue to live into this intentional community we have, sharing with each other our lives and our gifts, and helping each other to find out what God's created us to do, what God's placed inside of us, and we discover that, we develop it, we deploy it. Then this next piece is to on purpose, be careful, be strategic, live on purpose, making the most of every opportunity. Have lunch with somebody, take somebody out to coffee, to influence your world for Christ, to have conversations that Jesus can, through your story, through just being somebody's friend, bring about a new eternity for somebody. I want to close us in prayer and then ask you at your tables to think about and to talk about, what is your sphere of influence? What is your call? What part of this world, what group of people, what circumstance is yours to influence? Where is it that you can be most effective? I have discovered, as I said, for me, it's not sitting at a table on campus anymore. What is it for you? And then the follow-up is, how are you influencing that sphere for Christ? Those two questions. What is your sphere of influence? And how are you influencing that sphere for Christ? And maybe, if you don't know the answer to one of those questions, the folks at your table or in your Zoom group can help you figure it out. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you for revealing to us your glory, your love, your salvation. And I thank you that you have involved us in your work, that we are doing the Missio Dei, the mission of God, or rather you're doing it through us. And I pray that you would help us, God, give us wisdom, that we would make the most of every opportunity, that we would recognize that in these evil days, these days that have been evil since Genesis chapter 3, that you have called us to be the salt that influences and preserves, the light, God, that banishes the darkness and leads people in the path they should walk in. You've called us to be this influence. And I pray that you put on our hearts those around us who need what we have to share, and that you'd give us the wisdom and the insight to make the most of those opportunities, to redeem the time and bring others to know you. We pray this in your name, Jesus, and for the sake of this kingdom that you've brought us into. Amen.